Next, we'll quickly set up our monsters and get them running around in our levels. So if you want to use traditional frame-based sprite animation from a sprite sheet, you can do that. And later on in this tutorial series, I'm going to show how to create an animator for that, which you can use for explosions. So if you're not going to use motion for your monster animations, you can go to that tutorial and then come back to this, to the monster AI stuff afterwards. But if you're using motion, I'll show you how to set up your monsters. While I'm in here, I may as well quickly show you how I did the animation for this little guy. For the first idle animation, he just has these 3 keys. For idle 2, right here, I added a key to change the part options for what's showing and what's not. So it'll do a smooth alpha blend between those two, and then it does that to go to the blink, and then back to opening his eyes again. Same thing with the mouth motion. It's just 2 keys, partially open and closed, and the alpha blend kind of animates it on its own. Just a very basic, simple walk animation with feet straight up and down in this pose, and then for this one, and then furthest spaced apart at number 2, and as well as number 6. And then the ones in between are just kind of adjusting the animation so that his ears kind of wobble. There's a push one we're not using, but if we wanted to set up some kind of puzzle areas in the game where you could push stuff around to get to new areas, we could use that. I could have a straight up jump and a forward jump, but I'm kind of doing in between so that I can use the same jump animation for both. So here you have his anticipation pose, his jumping up into the air pose, and just kind of floating in the middle of the air, starting to come down, and then at 7, it's kind of his final pose. I don't really have him bending his legs when he hits the ground, he just kind of squishes a little bit. Ouch animation's pretty basic, same principles. There's a talking one too for if he wants to talk to somebody. The spell, I have him throw his arms back so that you can see the anticipation, and then stick his arms forward and change his facial expression a bit, tilt his head so that you can see he's really trying to throw that fireball or whatever spell it is. I should note too that if you make an animation and say you just put 1 key on this first keyframe and it doesn't have any other keys, it's not going to remember that pose, so it's going to discard it because it doesn't see any actual animation to interpolate. To prevent errors when you export it, I thought it would be just safer to have it discard a single keyframe animation. So if you want to keep an animation index and you want to call it something like neutral or something, so that you can just copy a single pose, I would have a key on the first frame as well as, like, say the middle frame or wherever, so that it'll actually keep that, but otherwise it won't save it. So we'll open up our monsters. I'm not going to save this. First monster we have is this guy here. You can see how his bones are set up. It's fairly simple. And what I did for this is I just made the basic motions first. I always start with the simplest motions first, where it's just a pose and a pose, and then when I add more complicated motions, for this it's basically just 2 keyframes, number 4 and 0, and then it interpolates back to 0 on this side. So these middle ones, I just copied the keyframes for them, and what I did to do that was I pick apart, make sure I'm only picking the one I want to work on when I copy the keyframe. So say this one for example, and then I just copy that keyframe to here, to here, to here with that isolated part, so it doesn't copy the keyframes for his head motion and stuff, and that way you don't have to worry about it duplicating his head position for all these keyframes as well. So then I do this one differently, where this would be picking a different part. You'd actually swap the part, so part swap, I want to pick that one, I want to say swap it out for this one, and then you'd copy that for every second keyframe with that part isolated, making sure that you hit pick part when you do it. That way you can make his chainsaw blades move. And I copied the entire animation into here, so I don't have to make his blades move anymore. And then all I did was I'd set keyframes for his head or his legs at like 2, 4, and 6. And then I'd use tools key blend for part, because otherwise it's going to be using the key positions for those in all those frames. So I'd pick the part I want to blend for, and then I'd blend from 0 to say 2, 4, and 6. And then this key right on the end here, just an extra one. And then that way I could animate it without it being interrupted by what it thinks it should be animating in the other keys. So it'll ignore the animation for those keys, for those parts, after you do that. Same principle for making the attack, and as well as the ouch. Once you kind of get the idea of using the key blend. And you can blend across multiple keys too. Like if I wanted to blend 0, 2, like there's a key option in there that tells you on the bottom of the screen of what you have to press to do that. Then there's this guy, the Monster. I just used 2 keyframes for his idle, using distortion to make him breathe. And instead of having a walk, he has a run. So our motion selector will have to know that if the walk animation doesn't exist, to look for the run animation. And to do this, I think I used a reference of a squirrel running to set up these keyframes. We got an attack and an ouch. That's all we really need is an idle, a walk, or a run, an attack, and something to indicate that he's been damaged. In case you aren't already aware of how to do it, I'm going to show you how to combine these 2 projects and export them together as a single file. So you start off by exporting a single txt. I'll just call it monsters.txt and just put it in my workbox. And then I'll open, make sure you've saved your project first. We'll open Monster. We'll export that as well, except this time we're going to click on Export Add Projects to one PNG and TXT. Select monsters.txt. So the thing to take note of, the folder that had the last monster we did is the folder that the PNG went into. So whichever one you're combining, it'll put it in the same folder as that monster if you're curious of where to find it. So we'll just cut this out from here. I'll paste it alongside the monsters. If you look in here, so the file it's going to look for is going to be called Monster Combo, because all it does is it adds underscore combo to the name of the last one that you're combining. And that's how it decides what to write as a PNG. So if you want to rename that and rename it in here, you can do that. In fact, I'm going to do that. We'll rename this monsters.png, and then we'll go into monsters.txt and just change this to monsters. So this will be changed to monsters, and everything else you can leave alone. Just make sure to save it. So if you hit Control F, type in animation, and just kind of make sure that every animation has a name. So you got idle, walk, because sometimes you forget to name one. It'll just say anim 5 or something, and then when you try to run the animation, it won't work. It'll just not animate it. And then it can recognize the next monster by this name here, monster.png. It's not using this because it's a combined one, but it's just using it so you pass in this sheet name when you want to use the monster instead of the Hellcat, and it'll know that you want to use this section in here. So these animations, monsters run, his attack, because they got the same names as some of the animations. You don't want to get the 2 types of monster animations confused. So that's how it makes that distinction. I'm going to copy these both at once, and I'm pasting these in the content folder. And for the monsters.txt, I'm actually going to cut this from here. Don't put it in this bin folder, but go back down and go into this bin here. And you'd want to paste it in here, just like Wizzy is in here. So that's the same folder where the executable's held. And when you do your release, you'll want to do that too. Copy that into there. Actually, you know what? Since you might have multiple levels, should probably rename this monsters1.txt. We'll do the same in the content folder for the image that holds all those images. So we'll rename that monsters1. In your project, go to the Solution Explorer and right click on the monsters folder. We're going to add a class to kind of keep track of all the different monsters. We'll add a class called monster system. Monster sys, we'll take this dot monsters off of here because we just want to keep this simple. First thing we'll do is figure out how many monsters we want to have. Call it max monsters, and we'll set it to 30. So that's the maximum amount we're allowed to add to a level. Obviously you might want to increase that to make your game more challenging, and we're going to use the map editor to add monsters to the level rather than spawning them. But you could create a spawning system too for Meow Motion animation. So we'll need access to Meow Motion, and we'll need a bunch of monsters, and we'll need to know how many monsters we have. And as with the other Meow Motion stuff, we'll need that rescale value, so it adjusts for the resolution. I mean, if your monster is just the right size for your target resolution, then you wouldn't actually need to use rescale at all. Okay, so we're gonna need a way to draw it, and Meow Motion stuff needs distortion, so we use quad batch. We'll need access to the map, so we can add the monsters to the map. We'll need access to the player, so we can attack the player. We'll need some explosion type stuff here. And we'll put some sounds in here. Sound effects, effect, monster, attack, 1. Let's resolve this. If we want players or other entities to be able to access or trigger these sounds, like for a demo or something, then we want easy access to them. Another way you could do this, if you didn't want to go the global route, would be to have a monster sound trigger, for example, a version of an enumeration of different types of sounds, and then you can dispatch something to play those sounds when you need them. Public sound effect monster ouch 2. Okay, I'm back from cleaning up the comments. Public monster sys constructor. I need to load some stuff, so I'll need the content manager. I'll just right click resolve. We'll need access to quad batch. We need access to the map. We need access to the player. Okay, and we're actually creating a new instance of MonoGame here because this is a totally different batch of monsters and animations. Let's pass in necessary ingredients, and we'll allocate some monsters, maximum amount. Make sure no monst is 0. Actually, it will be 0 anyway, because this is... But, you know, for those of you who aren't programming this in C#, you'll have to set that. Batch, map is map, player is player. Okay, we'll load, public, void, load, based on the level, and we'll pass in content manager again. I suppose we could keep a reference to it, but that should be okay. Say rescale, that's game1.rescale times 0.5f, because I want the monsters to be 50% smaller than the originals, because they're huge. Switch. Based on the level, what monsters are we going to load? We only have one level. And you might even do something like this, you know, case 1, case 2, same monsters for 3 levels, and then start putting in your monster loads in here. Let's do this. So we'll load in our monsters, our monster animations first. Monsters1, I think it was a capital M we used. If not, we'll have to change that. And the rescale value we'll take. It'll load those monsters and scale them. And we'll get the sound effects for these particular monsters. Content load. Want to load a sound effect. It's in the sound folder. Monster hit ouch 1. Sound folder. Monster ouch. So that's monster attack 1, monster ouch 1, and then we'll do that for monster 2, attack 2, ouch 2, chainsaw hit, chainsaw ouch. Or actually, I think it's named cat ouch. Wouldn't be chainsaw, that would make sense. Chainsaw says ouch. We'll just comment this. Okay, turns out I actually already did add the monster sounds in here. Cat ouch, that's correct. And we'll need to be able to add monsters now. So let's make an add monster method function, depending on what you want to call it. Public void add monster, and the type of monster, type, and a position. So let's say monsters num monster is new monster at the position. It's going to need MonoGame, we need quad batch, it's going to know the type, it's going to need access to the map and the player. Okay, so let's go into the monsters class and make it so we can accept. And in our monster class, we're going to need to add some things like our MonoGame, because the monster controls its own animations. It'll need access to that. And the monster will have its own, so MonoGame's shared, it's passed in by reference. Player is going to be created directly in here, a unique instance, because each monster is going to be animating a bit differently. And you need to know whether to flip it or not, because we're playing an animation. And I guess we'll need access to that rescale again.